Are you ready?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Go right ahead, Mart.
Okay. My friends, this week our nation's capital was overrun by hooligans, sparked by our political leader. It was just such irresponsible, thoughtless actions in Germany led Dietrich Bonhoeffer to end his studies in New York and return home, as he said, to be with my people. The mobs who were following an ambitious leader in Germany were much worse, of course. But the desecration of our capital this week calls us Christians to examine other insurrections and to know and learn from the wisdom of men who wrote about and ultimately experienced the cost of discipleship. I first heard and read about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian, sometimes known as Hitler's private prisoner, when at Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis in the winter of 1950. Like most of my fellow students, I had been in grade school or high school during World War II. We had our own memories. My mother's brother was a civilian construction worker in Wake Island when Pearl Harbor was bombed. He spent the entire war in a prison camp in Japan. We knew people who had fought and some who died in Europe. But my real introduction to Bonhoeffer came on my first day as editor of the United Church Herald, my first day in New York. I had flown in from St. Louis to meet the small staff who had worked with our elderly gentleman who had been a loner. My goal was to somehow diplomatically develop a different approach to church journalism. That day, the office secretary told me that today you have an appointment with a prominent congregational leader who has invited you to lunch at the National Arts Club. I knew that that was the place where my predecessor had spent long afternoons writing and editing copy. I must have looked annoyed because she then assured me that it would be a diplomatic thing to do. What happened in that room changed my life. As we were ushered into the dining room, my host was shocked at the change in appearance. He asked the maitre d', "What has happened to this room?" Finally, after we were seated, Hank explained to me his favorite table had been replaced. It was at this table, he told me, right here, where I welcomed Dietrich Bonhoeffer to New York. And right here, far too soon after that we met again, and Dietrich told me that he had to return to his own people. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's family and friends were deeply troubled by Hitler and the troops that followed his orders. I had known a little about Bonhoeffer but that personalized it in a way that I had not known before. And I began studying and reading as much as I could about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And a couple of years later, I was invited to travel to Europe, and I met with a small group of German theologians. They took me to a restaurant in the train station where Dietrich Bonhoeffer sometimes met with his friends in what he called the ultimate privacy of a public space. Bonhoeffer and his twin sister Sabrine were born in 1906, and Dietrich was confirmed in his local church in 1921. Although his parents were not particularly religious, he studied theology and went on to be ordained. In 1930, he came to New York to do advanced studies at Union Seminary. A group of New York churches, including the congregational churches, were his generous sponsors. But because the news from Germany seemed compelling, he returned to Berlin, where he began lecturing in 1931. Next year, he participated in an ecumenical conference in Geneva, Switzerland, where he made close friends with several persons and later organized the World Council of Churches. Hitler in those days was holding large rallies, making provocative statements. On January 30th, 1933, Hitler took the title of Reich Chancellor. The very next day, Dietrich Bonhoeffer gave a radio talk in Berlin on the changes in the leader principle. Bonhoeffer's radio talk was abruptly cut off the air before he was finished. In April 1933, Hitler's stormtroopers attacked local Jews. Dietrich's brother-in-law, a non-Aryan, was eliminated from public life and professions. Dietrich's response was an essay called "The Churches and the Jewish Problem." Bonhoeffer then served a brief pastorate in London, in London's German evangelical church, where he began writing his best-known book, The Cost of Discipleship. By September of that year, in 1933, he began collaborating with Martin Niemöller, another of the Pastors' Emergency League. By 1934 and 35, still in his early 30s, excuse me, he was a leader of the Confessing Church in open opposition to Hitler, whose Nuremberg laws canceled citizenship for Jews and Aryans. Tension was growing in Germany in 1936. In March, Hitler's troops occupied the Rhineland. In August, Dietrich attended the World Olympic Village. And at that same month, he was denied right to lecture at the university. He had organized a clandestine preacher seminary in Pomerania. That fall, one of the students was arrested and taken to a concentration camp on the eve of his ordination. The next fall, in 1937, the seminary was closed, and 27 students were imprisoned. Dietrich's book, The Cost of Discipleship, was published. Bonhoeffer's answer was to create team curacies to continue clandestine training of clergy in the confessing church. At the age of 32, excuse me, in February 1938, he made contact with 4 others in the secret plot against Hitler. That fall, he wrote a book called Life Together and saw Sabrine and her Jewish husband, Gerhard, off safely to Europe. Later this same month, Hitler and Neville Chamberlain signed an agreement on peace for Europe. But less than 10 days later was Kristallnacht, the simultaneous destruction of 600 German synagogues, the looting of more than 7,000 shops, and the arrest of 35,000 Jews. In March of 1939, Dietrich visited London to meet with a small group of leading leaders, including Reinhold Niebuhr from the United States, an American theologian, W.A. Vissertuft, who later organized the World Council of Churches, and his brother Gerhard. Later that same year, he made a trip to New York, shortly after Hitler's troops had moved into Czechoslovakia. The war spread to Poland, France, England, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Holland, and Belgium. In September of 1940, Bonhoeffer was ordered to report to the Gestapo, and was forbidden to speak in public. He began work on his book of ethics. As the war spread across Europe to the Soviet Union, Bonhoeffer traveled many places, including Norway, Sweden, and 2 trips to Switzerland, and again to Sweden. He was a trusted member of the counter-espionage, but he also had time to fall in love. And he then got engaged to Maria von Witter. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on September 11, 1941, Germany declared war on the United States. In 1942, after Hitler spoke of the final solution to the Jewish problem, Bonhoeffer traveled to Switzerland, Norway, Sweden, and where he met Christian leaders. In 1943, the German surrender came in Stalingrad, and in April, Bonhoeffer's home was searched, and Dietrich was arrested with several others. In May, Germany and Italy surrendered in North Africa. In 1944, events were moving fast. In June, the Allies landed on Normandy Beach, and a few days later, the attempt on Hitler's life failed, and Bonhoeffer was transferred to a Gestapo prison. The next February, he was transferred to Buchenwald concentration camp in April, and then to Regenburg, and then to Flossenburg, where he was court-martialed. The end of the same month, Hitler committed suicide. And on May 7th, Germany surrendered. To a fellow prisoner, an English officer, Bonhoeffer whispered, "This is the end, for me the beginning of life." A poet to the end, he wrote in his Bible, "God, I have loved these people, that I have borne and shared their burdens, and have seen its salvation, which is enough. Seize me, hold me, my staff is sinking. O faithful God, prepare my grave." Thank you.
Mart, thank you. I guess I may have missed a little bit at the very beginning. I'm sorry about that. I was refilling my coffee. Can you just retell how you met Dietrich? I think you did.
No, I never met him. Excuse me, I've got a little frog in my throat. I never met him. I studied him in seminary, and I became very much interested in him after excuse me. I don't know what's wrong with my throat this morning. After I did the book about him, after I had met some of his followers and heard more about him. And in visiting Germany, I had been with many of his followers.
Hey,
Try to answer any questions you might have.
yeah, hi, Mart. This is Dave. I was wondering if so thank you for sharing that reflection, and I hope I'm not causing you any discomfort by talking anymore, but I would I'd love to hear if you studied a little bit about when Bonhoeffer was at Flossenburg. From what I remember, he really sought to minister to his captors and develop relationships with people in the prison camp. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yes, and that's yes, and that's true. He was a pastor to the end, wanting to help people and more concerned about their condition than his own. And that's the kind of situation that he met in many places. I don't think that did justice to your question, Dave, but my throat is really kind of caught right now.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mart. We will try and give you some time to get your throat back in working order. Maybe some other people on the call have just some observations rather than questions for Mart. Obviously,
yeah. Mart, you've
allude, Mart, that there is some parallels to what's going on in our country. Yeah. Though, as I think you said, the strength of the nationalism in Germany was, infinitely more than it is here.
But Mart, you brought a lot back to me.
As I said, my own opinions are that we are a much more diverse country and such such outcomes from the nationalism in Germany in Dietrich's time, I don't think could possibly happen here. But and yes, just any other opinions about Bonhoeffer himself, or about any parallels that people may see with what's happening today in the world, not just in this country, because nationalism is something that is present. It's not something that's declining, but is probably actually increasing. There's no Zoom rooms, there's no nothing, just anybody who has some comments, please chime in.
Mart, that was a really helpful overview, and it brings back memories and probably will help me review things. My father went to Germany in 1938, 37 or 38, I think, with a group of other Yale Divinity School students. Among them his very good friend Bill Quillian, who was later president of Randolph-Macon College, and he kept a little bit of a diary. So they toured Germany, and he makes comments about the brown shirts and what he saw on the streets. But they then made their way to I want to say almost a youth conference or some conference in England after that. So I'll have to look into that. So was Bonhoeffer executed after Hitler's death?
No, just before, I think.
Just before, okay.
Well, thank you, Mart, very much for your summary of Bonhoeffer's life and the courage he had in which sent him back to Germany. The one parallel that I haven't heard anybody remark on yet is that, you know, Hitler himself talked about the big lie. And the big lie in this country now has been surfacing around the election, in which, you know, the parallels seem to me quite obvious. And when people don't call it for what it is, many more people kind of believe it. I was thankful for Dave's little talk this week when he called out the one senator. And I mean, the only real solution to that kind of deceit is the truth, of course, which has to be defended. And Bonhoeffer's example of putting his own life on the line, you know, is a tremendous kind of example for us all, and shows us how far we kind of live from the terror of having to do that. But nevertheless, it's still in many small ways the job for all of us. Anyway.
Yes, that's yes, that's true. And I think that it's also quite evident that it is enables other people to take leadership roles. And that was what Bonhoeffer was so very competent in doing, helping others to make their own contributions.
Yeah.
Martin, I wonder if you could sketch the relationship between Bonhoeffer and Reinhold Niebuhr.
Bonhoeffer came to this country to study theology, but he met, as far as I know, he met Reinhold Niebuhr only later in life, in a period, and certainly.
Niebuhr lived here in the U.S., right?
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah.
and taught here, and was
At
very
Union?
much part of the time. But he was very much informed by Bonhoeffer, and Niebuhr, of course, was of German background, so that that was very much a part of his own life. Niebuhr
So
taught-
Niebuhr was born after Bonhoeffer?
Oh, I don't know about the dates, but he must have been certainly a contemporary of him.
I
Niebuhr-
see, okay.
Niebuhr taught for a while at Eden Seminary, where I went, and then later at Union.
I see. Thank you.
I think Tillich fled the war and taught at Union too.
Yes,
Tillich was also German.
Yeah,
yeah.
Wow.
Germans.
I'd like to I'd like to thank Mart for his presentation today, but I'd also like to thank him much more deeply for nearly 10 years ago bringing to my attention Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I knew then how much Martin had studied him, and so I went out and I found at that time a recent biography of him, read his story, and was totally captivated by the depth of his faith. Principally, the thing that the edge was that he consciously decided to leave Union, return to Germany, fully well understanding that he could be executed. But he did that because of his faith. And I, after reading the book, I wrote maybe 3 sentences or so. And then after that, I'm going to tell you a little funny side story. I said, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a man of conviction, faith, and courage, a life that silences the noise, clears the sound, and clarifies our vision. And then I ended by one of the phrases that he said is, we know not what to do, but our eyes are upon thee.
Mm.
Now, I guess it was 2015, 2016, when we sold our house on South Mountain. There was a family came through to look at it, and who subsequently purchased the house. And the family brought with them their parents. And as they walked through the house and looked at everything, the grandmother, if you will, mentioned to her son that, well, it can't be all that bad. He reads Bonhoeffer. Thank you, Mart.
You're welcome.
And Martin,
Yeah.
the United Church of Christ Statement of Faith, there's that wonderful phrase about the cost and joy of discipleship. When the folks in the early days of the United Church of Christ drafted that, did they have Bonhoeffer in mind when they used the phrase,
Absolutely.
cost and joy of discipleship?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There were people who had known him when he was in the States, and who remembered him, and felt strongly that the United Church Christ ought to somehow incorporate some of Bonhoeffer's thoughts.
And you wrote a book, or did I recall one time you also did a film, or was it just the book?
Just the book.
And what was your angle in the book?
Well, it was I was working with a photographer who happened to be going to Germany the year that I was working on it. And so he and I, first of all, talked about things that he ought to get photographs of. And then I took those photographs and a bit of the actual texts of Bonhoeffer's statements, and kind of wove it together with some other text. It's a popular book designed for people who had not read Bonhoeffer before. If you're interested in seeing it, I'll bring you the copy sometime.
I'll look for it on A-Books or something.
It's on there. You can
Is it on there?
pick up a copy. I ordered a copy. It hasn't come yet, but
Good for you, Steve.
it's coming down from New Hampshire.
I would just like to make a connection between the cost of discipleship in Bonhoeffer's life, which was, of course, was great. And I think he wrote the book and the title of the book before he knew what that cost would be. However, in the book, he talks in great detail about cheap grace and real grace.
Mhm.
And cheap grace doesn't really have much effect upon your life. It's just, oh, God will forgive me, and everything will be fine, and I don't have to change necessarily. But of course, according to Bonhoeffer, when the grace of God enters a life, major change is required in order for that grace to be worked out in the person's life. And it's really kind of a powerful reminder for all of us about, putting the faith into practice. The cost of discipleship shouldn't be only associated with, a dramatic and life altering experience of Bonhoeffer. Anyway, that's my sermonette for the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mart, was Bonhoeffer a sole voice, or was there a movement in Germany, supporting his points of view?
Well, he wasn't the sole voice, and there was, he had some colleagues, but he was the most articulate voice, I would say.
Okay, yeah.
And that, of course, led to his being arrested.
Was he a public figure until he was arrested, or was he sort of living in hiding during the war?
No, he was out in public and wrote and spoke, and was and helped to organize the plot against Hitler. I don't know whether that answers your question, but he was very much active and knew that the result would be probably death.
Yeah, my recollection is that there was so much speech was suppressed from such an earlier time. It seems amazing that he was allowed to remain free as long as he was.
Yeah.
Well, he did a lot of it. That's true, but he did a lot of it in a clandestine way. He organized a seminary that was sort of a secret seminary, and eventually was found out. But he had followers, and they would talk, and eventually he was a part of the plot that against Hitler.
No,
He doesn't.
underscores his courage and bravery that he would do that in the face of everybody else being shut down so brutally for so long.
Yeah. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would be actively involved in the killing of somebody else. Do you know what his role was in that plot, Mart?
One of the significant roles was keeping the leaders in other countries, Christian leaders in other countries, informed of what was going on. But by the time that by the end, he was already in prison, of course.
Mm-hmm. But he wasn't actively involved in the planning of killing Hitler, was he?
Well, he thought it ought to happen, and there were men who were thinking about it much earlier, but that, of course, I don't think he was directly involved in it.
I think there were 4 plots to kill Hitler.
Something? Hello, can I say something?
Sure.
Hello.
Yeah.
My recollection is that the one thing that from the reading that I've done about Bonhoeffer, whom I love so much, is that he wrestled with God for a long time and very deeply about being involved in murdering someone. And he wrestled and wrestled to the point where he, as someone who loved God and was so in tune with God, didn't get a clear answer from God about what his involvement should be. And nevertheless, even if he was going to be submitted to eternal damnation for his act, decided to go ahead with this, that he thought it was what God wanted him to do, even though he didn't hear clearly. And to me personally, that's been such an example of someone who loves God so much and was so in tune with God, didn't always hear totally 100% clearly what he was supposed to do on this side of heaven.
Thank you for that contribution. Do you want to identify yourself? Because I don't see your name.
I'm Gerald Walle's girlfriend.
Wow.
His wife doesn't know about me. I'm Laurie. I'm Gerald Walle's girlfriend of 40 years.
I have, as long as we're talking, I have another strange comment, which is that, you know, we used to love a writer by the name of Eric Metaxas, who wrote a really beautiful book about William Wilberforce, and then later on wrote a book about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. However, Metaxas became a Trumper, and he actually has done such things as writing children books with the title Donald Drains the Swamp. And I've never understood how it's possible that you would write a book about Bonhoeffer and then support Trump as actively as he does. It's been like a completely mind-boggling experience. I've met him in person 10, 15 years ago. I can't imagine how something like that happens. And I'm sorry, but it's been on my mind the entire time we've been talking about Bonhoeffer here.
Thank you.
It's Torben. There's actually a Danish pastor by the name of Monk who also got assassinated in 1944 or killed by the Nazis. Originally was, I would say, in favor of Mussolini and Hitler, and then what became quite outspoken. I put a couple links to him in the chat, but I would say similar vein as what we're just talking about here. And he was, you know, he was killed for his views and place and so on.
Well, thank you everybody for your views. Have we got any other strong opinions to express before we close this morning's session?
I would like to just say one thing. I don't know exactly how to express it, but I am just really astounded, not by what happened to our capital, but that there's not so much more public outrage about the situation. It's like almost as if it was an anomaly, and now it's time to move on because there's going to be a new president. And the fact that people seem to be fairly complacent about the whole thing just boggles my mind. Because for me, it is really, really disturbing what happened. I mean, it really has shaken me up. And when I speak to people, they're just like, well, you know, it was a bad thing. What are you going to do?
Well, I think, Scott, Torben, I think one of the things that's disconcerting. So I have some friends I did not defriend on Facebook and who would probably be in that group. And it's clear that they did not see, when I started looking at their comments underneath and other people, there's a strong feeling that there was the right thing to do. And that the emperor is, the view of they don't feel heard and this is their right.
I have a good friend of mine, his name is Bobby, and he lives up in Burlington, Vermont. And we spoke. I shared Dave's little video with him, and he wrote back to me that he's been spending his full days fighting with people on Facebook about how horrible the attack was and how wrong they are to support the attack. like you said, that he's just surprised that so many people really felt it was not a bad thing at all.
Yeah, I've seen a poll that says that.
Guys, can I just
45
jump in for a second? We could be talking about this all day. And Scott, obviously your thoughts there are deeply profound. But yeah, I prefer to close on a sort of a somewhat upbeat note. This could get into a deep discussion, which is obviously needed, but probably not this morning. I didn't want to cut you guys off, but well, I did, I suppose.
Well, at some point, I'd like to have a conversation about it. But thank you, Mart.
You're welcome. I'll be glad to talk with anybody about it.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening in. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you all.
And I'm going to be seeing Rob and Scott and maybe one or two